Welcome to part 2 of travelling through time on the Mustian journey. In this episode, we will explore the origins of the Mustian surname and its connection with the ancient medieval family known as the Muschamps. Where does your family come from? How far back in time are you able to trace their origins? These are some of the questions that haunt us and drive us to dig for more and more answers. If we are really honest with ourselves, we secretly hope that our ancestral heritage and our inherited surnames will remain completely unchanged, far into the future, as well as into the past, with no spelling variations, cultural modifications, or ethnic alterations for thousands of years, perhaps to the time of Christ, or even prior to that. Call it an existential crisis, or just wishful thinking, but it touches each of us deeply, as we grapple with the spectre of an eternal timeline that stretches out before each of us. We desperately want to know if our fleeting lives will transcend this brief existence, and our heritage as well as our posterity somehow play a role in that transcendency. However, through the crushing passage of the ages, the vast majority of family heritages and ancestral identifications are severely damaged, if not completely obliterated by the blistering heat of the fires of time. Indeed, it is truly a rare experience for a common genealogical structure to remain intact. For more than merely a few hundred years, for most families, memory dissolution, poor record keeping, divorce and estrangement, political upheaval and war, forced migration, and premature deaths all serve to splinter a cohesive lineage until there are scarcely fragments of family knowledge left intact. This was an all too familiar story for the Mustian family at large, until recently, when a treasure trove of genealogical information in their ancestral homeland of England was divulged. In part 1, we discussed the fact that the Mustian family of the United States of America is actually a British family, not of Armenian descent, which was previously postulated. After decades of exhaustive research, it has been discovered that the surname Mustian appears literally hundreds of times in hundreds of historical and genealogical documents, stretched out over hundreds of years, in England, Ireland, Scotland, France, and other Western European countries, all the way back to the early 1500s. Even more astounding has been the astonishing revelation that the Mustian families of England appear to be descendant from an ancient medieval family known as the Muschamp family, and that the name Mustian is an Anglicanized rendering of the French Norman name of Muschamp, who aided in the Norman conquest of England in 1066 AD and long served during the era of feudalism as barons, knights, sheriffs and members of parliament on behalf of the emerging British Empire. Perhaps no greater evidence of this connection exists than this statement, which was unearthed in the papers of the infamous King of England, King Henry VIII, written directly to a man named Edward Mustian, who is irrefutably also known as Edward de Muschamp. Henry VIII, by the grace of God, King of England and of France, defender of the faith, Lord of Ireland, and on earth immediately under God, Supreme Lord of the Church of England. To our trusty and well-beloved servant, Edward Mustian, greetings.
This is really where it gets interesting for me. Now, this is where I believe that we came from, actually, and where the Mustian name got started. As I was, researching all this stuff, when I started really looking into it in an online search venue, I started to find all these Mustian names over in England. Just hundreds of them, hundreds of names going back all the way to the 1200s time frame, and even before that. And so I started realizing that we were really a British family, and then all within a space of about an hour, I realized that we were actually from France. But we came over in the invasion of England in 1066, in the invasion of England.
To effectively tell the story of the Muschamp family origins and how the Mustian name came to be, one must first begin by telling the tale of the Norman invasion of England in 1066 AD. The military conquest of England by William, Duke of Normandy, resulted in profound political, administrative and social changes in the British Isles, which officially ushered in the age of feudalism, as we know it today. William the Conqueror, or William the Bastard, depending on which side of the battle you were on, secured a decisive victory at the Battle of Hastings. However, the conquest was merely the final act of a complicated drama which had begun years earlier in the reign of Edward the Confessor, the last king of the Anglo-Saxon royal line. The conquest resulted in the subordination of England to a Norman aristocracy. William distributed estates to his followers on a piecemeal basis, granting lands directly to his fighting men, making them his tenants-in-chief, or barons. Their estates were consisted of manor houses, which were later converted into castles, scattered through a number of shires all over the country. And this is the reason that the Muschamp family gained historical notoriety and significance in England. Robert de Muschamp was recorded in Battle Abbey Roll as the seneschal or senior servant of a highly prominent figure in the invasion, whose name was Gilbert de Ghent of the Royal House of Flanders, today known as Belgium. He was recorded as a battle commander in the Domesday Book, and is famously known as the nephew of William the Conqueror, who gave Gilbert the titles of 172 English manors to be steward of for his faithful service. Robert de Muschamp and the rest of the Muschamp family were then granted some of those manor houses to secure and protect. Most notably were Lincolnshire, Buckinghamshire, Nottinghamshire, and Bamburghshire in Northumberland. The Edward Mustian, referred to by King Henry VIII, is a direct descendant from this line of Muschamps, and was eventually named the Baron of Bar Moor Castle in Northumberland in the mid-15th century.
This quote from King Henry VIII, by the grace of God, King of England and all that stuff, but at the bottom there he says, "To our trusty and well-beloved servant, Edward Mustian's greetings." And the reason he's writing this to Edward Mustian's is because Edward Mustian's, or Edward Muschamp, and we'll show the connection between the two names, was a feudal lord who basically served under the king. He was a baron, and that means he was a landholder and a landowner of land that belonged to the King of England. And so he's providing for the king through that land, and all the people that are working on that land for him. And so, as long as I've been studying this stuff, I've found that I've had to do a lot of education on my own to figure out what's going on here. And this is a very simple diagram of feudalism, European feudalism, from the 900s to the 1500s time frame. And this is where our family, the only reason that we know anything about our family this far back is because our family, the Muschamp family who became the Mustian family, were barons and knights under this feudalistic system. The king at the top, and then we're a little bit lower than the king as barons, landowners, or fiefdoms as they called them, and then the knights who protected those fiefdoms, and then the villagers or the serfs at the bottom there who do all the work and don't get much glory out of it. The poor people is essentially who they are, who provide food and services to the knights and to the kings and to everybody else above them. And then the barons or the knights provide protection and military service to the barons and the kings, and then down the other side it goes. There you see. But this is, like it or not, this is kind of where our family came from. I'm still shocked by it, and 5 years later, just this connection that we have with this ancient medieval family is fascinating to me. And so, how do we know that for sure? Well, one of the most prominent places that the Muschamp family was a lord over was a place called Barmore up in Northumberland. Now, that is the furthest part north in the United Kingdom, or actually in England, and then it's right on the Scottish border. And so that area, Northumberland, was in constant battles back and forth with the Scottish people, and the landowner or the barons there at Barmore Castle in Northumberland were charged with holding the line and not allowing the Scottish to come down and take over. Well, Baron Muschamp of Northumberland, but in this document you see here, the Lairds and Gentlemen, a study of the landed families of the eastern Anglo-Scottish borders, they write that sometimes Muschamp is spelled Mustians. And that is the connection, and you can find that connection in, again, I won't say hundreds of places in documents online, but tens of 20s, of 30s of places. You find all these documents that have the names Muschamp and Mustian tied together. Sometimes it'll say something like this, sometimes spelled Mustians, or it'll say or Mustians. Sometimes the name Mustian will be on top, and it'll say also known as Muschamp, or alias Muschamp, or something along those lines. But they make this connection, and these are very official documents or studies or historical findings. The peerage of England has that connection as well. And it calls him a chief and a knight, or in chief and knight service of the barony of Muschamp. And so, the idea of being a chief or a baron there, and also a knight service in that idea of protecting that Scottish border. And I'm not going to bring it out in this portion, but there are stories of battles that happened and murders that took place. And there's one story of two Mustians who were involved in a murder and these kind of things.
At this point, you are probably fairly skeptical about how a French family name could magically morph into a new British name, but there is an extraordinary justification for this hypothesis. and it holds the very key to understanding the Mustian family mystery. At the time of the Norman invasion, surnames were a new concept, unknown in England and in their infancy in Europe. A very small minority of the Norman knights who came to England at this time actually had what we would term surnames. That is, a hereditary name to be passed on to successive generations. All of these made reference to the name of the estates they came from in Normandy. Consequently, the Muschamp name came from the area known as Muschamp in Normandy, France. Today, surnames are one of the main ways by which we identify ourselves. But in the 11th century, people in England were known by their first names and then a byname. Bynames and surnames were very similar, but a byname was not passed down to the next generation. Both were based on similar ideas, identifying someone by the way he or she looked, their personality, occupation, or the place where they lived. Although William I was victorious at Hastings in October 1066, he was then faced by the arduous task of bringing the rest of the country under his control. No easy feat. One way of doing this was to redistribute all the land in the country. Experts believe that one reason for the growing use of surnames among the new ruling class of Normans was to strengthen their association with the land which they had been given. These were uncertain times and no one felt secure. Surnames did not suddenly come into use overnight. While we can pinpoint their origin among the landed classes at this time, it was not until the 13th century that surnames started to come into general use. The Norman conquest reshaped England, blending Old English with Norman French. This fusion created Middle English, marking a linguistic evolution. Socially, it deepened class divides, seen in vocabulary differences between nobles and peasants. Before the Normans arrived, Old English, with its Germanic roots, was the dominant language in England. However, the Norman conquest introduced a new linguistic layer, Norman French, as the language of the new ruling elite. French quickly permeated the upper echelons of society, becoming the language of the court, the legal system, and the church. Meanwhile, Old English remained the language of the common people. Over time, these two languages began to intermingle, giving rise to Middle English, a rich hybrid that combined the vocabulary and simpler grammar of Old English with the elegance and sophistication of French. The influence of Norman French extended beyond words. It also affected the way English sounded and was structured. A change in the pronunciation of words under French influence caused some sounds to be silent, giving us the modern pronunciations we use today. Accordingly, the name Muschamp became anglicised, with the letter P being silent, and the name Mustian was first pronounced as Mustian.
After the Muschamp family came over from France into England, and then the English language started to be established and the spellings were all Anglicanized, is what they say. All the French names were Anglicanized to sound more English and to make it easier for English-speaking people to pronounce them. They changed it from Muschamp or Muschamp to Mustian. And what you find as you search is all these different variant names, spellings of the name Mustian and Muschamp. One of the things I think you find is so fascinating to me is to find our name, Mustian, in Old English writing in a very, very old book. And you can find that many places in online search archives and different things. Birth dates were written down this way. Marriage licenses were written in books like this. And so if you go back, you can see our name and you see that S. It kind of looks like an F but that's the way they used to write the S back in the day. And so it's so fascinating to see our name in an old book like that. And so one of the things as you're searching for these, you can see in this document right here the name Muschamp and Mustian and Mustians, and all different spellings of the name are represented in this one document on the back of this page here. But you see these different spellings: Muschamps, Mustains, Muschamp. But again, these are all the same name, but they're spelled kind of how you say it. And this is all happening before they refined the English language and refined the spelling conventions that we know today. And it was very common. You see the name Mustians down at the bottom, and that's a holdover from the Muschamp time frame. But it's interesting to note that William Shakespeare's name was spelled with 25 different variations. Again, this is kind of the golden era of the English language coming into existence, and the spellings were just very different. You can see it again here on this one, just a lot of different ways to spell Mustian. But what you find, and these are kind of the ways you see it spelled in America, Mustian. Again, it's the way somebody pronounces it, and that's the way they write it down.
The peerage system helped to resolve some of these problems by officially codifying the correct names, spellings, family lineages and ranks of the ruling class. An intricate social hierarchy, the peerage, has played a pivotal role in the governance and societal structure of the British Empire since the 13th century, after its adoption from the aristocratic traditions of medieval France, from the highest echelons of nobility to the complexities of hereditary titles. The peerage system is a tapestry woven with history, culture, and influence. Astonishingly, the surname Mustian, and not the French name Muschamp, appears in this ancient document, not once but twice. While difficult for us to read and comprehend now, the correctly spelled name of Mustian appears in this passage concerning the offspring of Sir Theobald Russell, William Russell, his son and heir, who married the daughter and heir of Mustian. Yet another ancient document, the Heliconia, 1815, clearly defers to the peerage while commenting on the name, when it says Muschamp, or Mustian according to the peerage. Again, we see a similar passage stating, Lady Frances, born February 6, 1665, and married to Sir George Lane, Knight and Baron, created Lord Viscount Lanesborough, and secondly, to Mustian, Esquire. So, we can see clearly that the official expression of this family's surname, due to anglicised spelling conventions and the peerage of England, became known as Mustian by the 15th century. However, since both names are extant to this day, it appears that while some families chose to shed the old French surname, still others chose to retain it in Western Europe, as well as in the United States. Throughout the turmoil of the next 5 centuries, the fortunes and failures of the de Muschamp family in England and their descendant Mustian heirs seemed to rise and fall along with the system of feudalism which they helped to perpetuate. Despite the grueling hardships of constant succession wars and conflicts at the Scottish border, simmering tensions with the Anglo-Saxon population of whose land they occupied, the fickle and capricious nature of the ever-changing array of kings and kingdoms whom they served, Egypt, and yes, even the Christian Crusades, of which they played a significant role, this family persevered through it all. Eventually assuming a new identity, cashing in their chips and setting sail for America to begin again in the New World. While countless examples of the direct relationship between these two families exist, we will explore a few of the most convincing and dramatic illustrations in relation to the lives they lived, homes they inhabited, and fiefdoms they governed. The chronological and historical records, while replete with references to this family, are in no way complete or even adequate in order to gain a full understanding of their ancestral heritage. But they do provide a depth of detail into certain aspects of their lineage that most families could only hope to duplicate. Keep in mind that many of these events occurred over 500 years ago, while others are approaching 1,000 years into the past, deep into the dark recesses of the medieval time period. What we know with a high degree of reliability is that William I invaded and conquered England in 1066. His nephew Gilbert de Gaunt was entrusted with over 150 land grants all over England that a man named Robert de Muschamp, from an area of Normandy, France, named Muschamp, or Moss Field, served faithfully as Gilbert's seneschal, or master servant, and became a patriarchal figure to a family who become well known as the de Muschamp family. During the feudal and Tudor periods, various authors from the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries described this family as being of great antiquity and eminence. The mightiest baron in all these northern parts. An ancient and powerful family. But even these authors speak of the family as one in the past tense, who were once great, but one whose true significance has been lost to history. Still, we know further that the family was entrusted as barons, knights and church officials over many of the lands granted to Gilbert de Ghent. Notably, we find the Muschamp name mentioned in relation to Lincolnshire, Yorkshire, Chillingham, Wales, Dorset, Leicestershire, Durham and Nottinghamshire. While these references are fairly minor and not supported with much additional information, a great deal of information exists about the Muschamp family, having significant authority in Northumberland, Buckinghamshire, London, Camberwell in Surrey, and Dublin, Ireland. Therefore, we will focus our attention on these 5 areas and on the branches of the family that governed them.
There was 2 predominant families that owned this place. There was the Muschamp family first, who came over from France, didn't they?
Yeah, they were in the Norman land division. They were given the barony of Wooler, plus land from Chillingham, Belford, Lawick, here, Forneekle, Pallisburn, Branxton. So they had a huge tract, but obviously they had to fulfil the wishes of the king and defend the area, and if they were called to arms and so on. But Barmah was first mentioned in 1119, 1120, when it was given to the Muschamp family, and a hold was built big enough to house 30-40 horsemen.
It was all about the border.
Yeah.
It was all about the border raiders, the reavers that used to come over, and we used to defend the border.
It was obviously on the military map because Edward I, Edward II, Henry V and the Earl of Surrey in September 1513 all camped here with huge English armies.
The Norman conquest of England didn't happen overnight. Fierce battles and skirmishes with the native Anglo-Saxon resistance continued for many years. As they worked their way through the shires and countryside, it would appear that Muschamp family members were left to hold land in each of the northeastern shires. As the Norman armies advanced northward for the next 2 decades, the Muschamp men remained as barons and knights until the Normans eventually possessed the entire area known as Northumberland. We know that a Roger Muschamp was first given Wilgeby, Lincolnshire in 1086, and his son Robert de Muschamp, seneschal to Gilbert de Ghent, had a son named Hugh Muschamp, who held lands in York and Lincoln for many generations. The area of Muschamp in Nottinghamshire is named after this branch of the Muschamp family. But the most influential branch of the family by far was seated in Northumberland, where Reginald de Muschamp held and built a tower house in 1130. A licence to crenellate the house was granted by Edward III in 1341. Many generations of Muschamps fought to hold the Scottish border, maintained the feudal system from this keep for nearly 400 years. However, it took a heavy toll on them, and by 1541, when a survey of the area was taken, it described the house as in extreme decay and almost ruinous for lack of reparations, and counted among the fortresses which were destroyed by the Scots. Some repairs and improvements were carried out in 1584, but the Muschamps, who were also known by the name Mustian, by this time experienced financial difficulties, and in 1649, following the death of George Mustian, who was the Sheriff of Northumberland, Lady Muschamp finally renounced the administration in favour of her husband's creditors. These turbulent years had drastic results on the Muschamp fortunes, and his heirs were impoverished for supporting King Charles I. The Society of Antiquities recorded that Sir George Muschamp, the last owner of Barmore, spent his whole estate in the service of Charles I. Charles was the King of Great Britain and Ireland from 1625 to 1649. And his reign was marked by conflict with Parliament, which ultimately led to the English Civil Wars and his execution. He believed in the divine right of kings, the idea that monarchs derive their authority from God and are not accountable to any earthly power. But this belief had severely fallen out of favour with most common people, and it clashed with Parliament's desire for a greater role in governing. In 1642, the English civil wars broke out between supporters of the Parliament, parliamentarians, and the supporters of the King, the Royalists, a war in which a Major Muschamp served and died in 1648. After years of fighting, Charles was defeated, eventually convicted of high treason for refusing to recognise the court's authority, and executed in 1649, the same year George Mustian died. The execution marked a turning point in English history, and England became a republic under the Commonwealth, which established the principle that the king could not rule without Parliament's consent, thus conclusively ending the system of feudalism. After these crushing defeats, it wouldn't be hard to imagine the remaining family members of this line changing their name to Mustian and immigrating to America, But we may never know for sure, because this Muschamp lineage ends here. Further research is needed in order to rule out this family line as the possible immigrant that brought the Mustian name to America.
Another document points out, again, this connection, the Muschamp Mustians, also known, or in parentheses, Edward Mustians, the guy that King Henry was talking about. These are the letters and papers of King Henry himself, and he puts down that Muschamp, also known as Mustians. Another document below that, Richard Mustians, i.e. Muschamps. Okay, so there's the occasion where they're flipped. I.e. is kind of the idea of, in other words, Muschamps. He was a knight. He was the Lord of Chillingham in 1242. The first time I saw this document, it was written in Latin. And it said, Ricardo di Muschampe, or something along those lines. It was fascinating to break that down and to see that old document in 1242 written about one of our family members so long ago.
Before we say goodbye to Barmore Castle and leave Northumberland to journey southward, we must acknowledge once more this very strange relationship between the Muschamp and the Mustian families. It is clear that by the beginning of the 15th century it had developed into a commonly accepted naming practice that went well beyond mere spelling variation, mispronunciation, and typical language conventions. As we have seen, multiple groups of families separated by hundreds of years, and many counties of English countryside were now using the Mustian surname, and diverse publications were recording this transition in an effort to properly identify the individuals who were appropriating this new name for themselves. In the manuscripts of the Duke of Rutland, the names of the gentry or nobility for various counties and shires were recorded under the heading of Northumberland. We read in 1549 a list of gentlemen in the county of Northumberland: Sir John Widrington Knight, Sir Thomas Grey Knight, Sir Roger Fenwick Knight, and so on. But then we find our friend Mr. Edward Muschamp, and in parenthesis, Mustians. Also, we see below a Mr. Oswald Muschamp, bailiff of Belford, the Laird of Hebborn, but for whatever reason he is not recognised as going by the name of Mustian. Very interesting. Oftentimes, these documented references serve as a footnote or an index reference in the back of a book, being used for clarity or emphasis. But they are nevertheless a pervasive addition to the archaeological records that we find in the United Kingdom, and therefore we must acknowledge their validity. Windsor Castle stands as one of the most iconic and historically rich castles in Europe, renowned not only for its architectural splendour, but also for its long-standing connection with the British royal family. This grand residence has served as a royal home for over 1,000 years, and it is the oldest and largest inhabited castle in the world. Windsor Castle is located in the town of Windsor, in the storied county of Berkshire, England, strategically positioned on the River Thames, which has historically provided both a natural defence and a route for transportation. Only 20 miles west of the capital of London, it has proven to be a significantly useful residence for the royal family throughout British history. The castle is nestled into a picturesque setting with extensive gardens and parklands surrounding it, providing stunning views of the Thames Valley. The Windsor Great Park nearby, stretching over 5,000 acres, further enhances the majestic setting of this historic site. Ironically, it is precisely this majestic setting and the beauty of the surrounding grounds, and not the castle itself, that provide the backdrop for our next biopic of the Mustian family. Because somewhere buried deep beneath the sprawling park grounds and annex facilities of Eton College, and just a stone's throw across the Thames River, lie the remnants of an ancient farm and cottage house once known as Mustian's Farm. Occupying at least 60 acres of prime real estate, and probably many more at its peak. This remnant of the feudalistic system of land ownership is a complete mystery as to who the original owner was. Unfortunately, the history books are silent on this point, at least so far, and the only clue that we have that this farm ever existed lay in the accounting data of the Crown records, which concern the parcelling out and selling off of the land in order to make room for the expansion of the Windsor Park lands and the development of athletic and boarding house facilities for Eton College. Further compounding this enigma, there stands in the same vicinity a mid-century modern Georgian-styled boarding house erected in the 1930s, which, by the way, arbitrarily bears the name Mustian's House. However, when school officials and historic documents are consulted about this unusual name, there are no answers to be found regarding what it means or who it refers to. Even more perplexing, a few counties to the west, in a village of Gloucestershire, sits the distinguished Slaughter Country Inn, where each of the rooms bear a name of historic significance. Curiously, one of the rooms bears the name, you guessed it, Mustian's Room. Similarly, the current proprietors of the inn are unable to provide a justification for this historic designation, and genealogical research has thus far failed to establish the presence of Mustians or Muschamps living in the area until the 18th century. But obviously an individual of once great importance must have intended to be honoured here by having their name immortalised in this way. Once again, we have only ashes to sift through in our search for the answers we seek due to the voracious fires of time. Still, we have discovered several bits of circumstantial evidence among the debris which enable us to create at least a composite sketch of who this individual might have been.
One of the fascinating things that you find is that there is still today is the Eton College, where all of the sons of the Prime Minister and lords of the House of Commons and everything, that's where their sons go. It's a boys' school, but one of the dormitory houses at Eton College, again, just a stone's throw across the river, is this college that has a dormitory called Mustian's House. That's the name of the house. And if you do a little research about that, you find that there was a farm there owned by the family Mustians. And Mustian's Farm, you see in this document in the National Archives of the UK, there was a lease and subsequent sale of part of that farm to Eton College so that they could build their dormitories for Eton College. And on that piece of ground, there's still a house, dormitory that was built there called Mustian's house. Now, if you call over there, and I have, and ask them, who is this house named after? Nobody knows. There is a hotel, kind of bed and breakfast type place. There's a room in that ancient hotel called Mustian's room. And again, you call that hotel and ask them, who'd you name this room after? We have no idea. All of these things go back to the medieval times, where the Mustian family, the Muschamp family, was fairly well known. And so we don't know if he was from a family that came up or came down from Northumberland after the feudal system had ended. There's a lot of things that are lost in this. It seems when the family Muschamp came over in the invasion of 1066, the Mustian family, or the Muschamp family, took part in taking over a lot of land in England in different places. And so you'll find the names all over the country where they had taken over land that was owned previously by the Anglo-Saxons. And now that the Normans have invaded, the Norman invasion, they have taken over now, and their barons are going to own those pieces of land now rather than the Anglo-Saxon lords. Mustian is another one of these frequently misspelled pronunciations or frequently spelled names of Mustian, but against the same person. We know that because in a different document, they'll be talking about the same guy and they'll spell it Mustian or Muschamp or vice versa. But this guy, John Mustian, born at Ingwin, and that's Belgium, which was Flemish then, is recorded as Henry, King Henry VIII, an arras maker. Now, an arras maker, this is also a very fascinating aspect of this study. An arras is a tapestry. King Henry was known as the king who had more royal tapestries commissioned and made and held in his various castles and palaces than any other king in history. And they're priceless today. If you can find one, they're absolutely priceless. And so this guy, John Mustian, he was making those. And it's interesting that he's from Belgium. And I'll get more into that whole thing about how famous those tapestries were and the fact that they brought them. But most likely that's one of the reasons that the Mustian family, or the Mustian family, became so famous at the time of King Henry VIII, because they were, very intimately involved with decorating his palaces at the time, and they became very wealthy as a result of that.
Could this John Mustian, the arras maker of King Henry VIII, be our mystery man whose name resides in such strange places? Well, it is entirely possible, but it's more likely that he descends from a separate Muschamp branch of the family which commands this type of historical respect. Was this branch descendant from the Northumberland line? We certainly have reason to believe that Edward Mustians from Barmore Castle had at least a good working relationship with King Henry. Perhaps that was the connection that brought John Mustian down to work at Windsor Castle. Was this branch descendant from an ancient barony in the original landing party of William the Conqueror that supported Windsor Castle from the beginning? Or was this John Mustian brought over from the old country in Flanders, especially to take the lead in the artisan craftsmanship work at the castle? We may never know the answer to these questions, nor do we even know if we are asking the right questions. But we do know that an artisan role like merchant and craftsman, especially one that worked so closely with the king, was often the equivalency of being a lord or baron. Therefore, you were entitled to land grants and manor houses under the system of feudalism. As feudalism began to fail, along with the popularity of those who were royalist sympathizers before and certainly after the Civil War, this family branch, just as George Mustian's family did in the north, may have suffered hardship for their loyalty to the king and were forced to move or even migrate somewhere else. Regardless, we know for sure that less than 50 years after the Civil War ended, the Mustian were gone, and their farm was sold back to the Crown, along with many other farms in the area who were caught up in sort of a land redevelopment project being directed by the Crown. Clearly, this documentation indicates that the land grants, which had been issued to feudal barons and landholders, were now being repurposed at the discretion of the Crown. Essentially, in all of its various forms, the documentation only indicates that Eton College will be leasing the land that was once known as Muscham's farm for a period of 99 years, but it tells us nothing about who this Mustian person was or what happened to him or them. However, only John Mustian the arras maker seems to fit this profile.
Again, right down the road, most likely the arras maker family who's making all these tapestries and taking them back over to the palace. Here, King, what do you think of this tapestry? Is this good enough? And then hanging that tapestry up in his palace and all those kind of things. I have put two and two together, and I think that's what is happening here. And then that family was wealthy and famous until, again, the feudal system went away. And you know how politics works. You know, at one time you're in with the big dogs, and then things change and seasons change, and now you're out. And it would appear that the Muschamp family fell on hard times, and they lost their fortunes eventually. And it could be, I don't know this for sure, this is still a link I'm trying to make, but it could be that the Mustian family decided, well, we don't want to be associated with the feudalistic system any longer, the Muschamps and all that. We don't want to be associated with that stuff anymore. We'll just call ourselves Mustian from here on out. And so I think that's what has happened. And so it would seem that there are still Muschamps over there, and there are still Mustians over there. It's fairly clear that Muschamp maybe lived in, the Muschamp family perhaps lived in Normandy, France for maybe a couple of 100 years, but they originally came from Belgium, which was Flanders earlier than it was named Belgium. And so I don't know if they were there for hundreds of years before that, or if that was just a temporary stopping place. But again, this area of Flanders where they came from, England, is where they produced a lot of the textiles and a lot of the means of producing these tapestries that ended up in the king's palaces. And they're still known for that to some degree today. And so where they were at before then, I don't know. Is there a Jewish connection? Is there a Roman connection? I'm not really sure. And people ask me, are you, where are you from? Are you French, or are you British, or what? And I say, yeah, both. It seems like, yeah, we came over from England, but before that, 500 years before that or so, it seems like we came over in the Norman invasion from France. And then, a couple hundred years before that, it seems like we came from Flanders or Belgium.
Before we leave the Shire of Buckingham, We need to drive home this connection between this John Mustian, the tapestry maker, and the rich artisan heritage tied to his family. In a document entitled Architecture in England, we find the following statement. On the introduction of the manufacture of tapestry in this kingdom, we have satisfactory evidence. It was certainly previous to the year 1344, when there was a writ issued. But then it goes on to say, Henry VIII gave a patent to John Mustian to be his arras maker. So here again we have a direct connection with the name Mustian, along with the name Mustian. And in the index of this document we find an incredible corroboration of the connection with the Muschamp family, as well as the documentation of many generations of arras making going all the way back to the 12th century. To deepen the connection even further, we also know that the region known as Ghent in Flanders was specifically known for the exquisite tapestries that they manufactured and shipped to royal palaces all over Europe. In a French journal on tapestries from 1876, we find perhaps the most definitive illustration of this subject. Translated to English it reads, "In the reign of Henry VIII, tapestry hangings of national or foreign manufactures were very widespread. An Act of 1513 mentions the importation by a single ship of 4,000 pieces of tapestries. The king himself loved and encouraged this artistic industry, and by letters of patent he appointed a Sir John Mustian, his manufacturer of hangings at Arras." Furthermore, the addition of the phrase letter of patent and the prefix of Sir being attached to his name firmly establishes this John Mustian as a member of the elite class, or as a nobleman considered a gentleman of society on par with knighthood, or even as a baron, and therefore justifying the possibility of this family holding land. So was this the immigrant family that came to the New World? It is completely plausible for this John Mustian to have the motivation and the means to immigrate to America, but we have no way of confirming his identity due to the commonality of his name. The Christian name John was extremely popular in England at this time, and there are many John Mustians in the genealogical records during this period.
A book was written, The Bellman of London, in 1608 by Thomas Dekker, and he dedicated it to Master Francis Mustian of Peckham. We have no idea who Francis Mustian is of Peckham, but we know that there was a very famous family in the Peckham area, which is kind of south of London, and they owned a large estate. And so we don't know if he was from a family that came up or came down from Northumberland after the feudal system had ended. There's a lot of things that are lost in this. And so that's what you see happening. And so we don't know if this guy, Francis Mustian, was from one of these barons that were down in the south of England, or if he was from a family that was up north, and as the feudalistic system went away, they just kind of migrated south and became rich through finance or something along those lines. A lot of that has been lost. I'm still researching that and trying to put things together, and I'll talk a little bit about that in part 4. But that's a part of it. So he must have been of some note, because somebody dedicated a book to him and called him Master. And so, again, these are very fascinating things to me. I don't know if they are interesting to anyone else. But here's another one, a man of the uncommon name. And we do have a very uncommon name, right? I've asked people in England, when I run into somebody from England, I say, hey, have you ever heard the name Mustian? And they're like, no, absolutely not. And so it's an uncommon name in America. It's an uncommon name in England. It's probably an uncommon name in France and Belgium as well. but we know that it's uncommon. But he was a senior church warden of St. Giles, Cripplegate, 1650. And so there's a lot of church involvement. There are a lot of bishops and priests who were named Mustian down through the line. So that's very interesting to me that there are so many who were in the ministry in some form or shape or form, usually in a Catholic sense, but some of them Church of England. And of course in America there are a lot of Mustians that have been in the ministry as well. And so London Citizen 1651.
Essentially just a suburb of southwest London today, ancient Camberwell and its tiny hamlet Peckham were mentioned in the Domesday Book as one of the more important settlements in the area, with a church and a manor owned by Hymo, the half-brother of William the Conqueror. Both the Muschamp and Mustian names are mentioned extensively in London as well as Camberwell in Surrey. Therefore, we will examine them concurrently because they likely all spring from the same ancestor, namely the medieval servant of Gilbert de Ghent and William the Conqueror, who was most likely left behind to hold this land, which was taken during the invasion of 1066. There does appear to be a common ancestry with the Muschamp family in Northumberland. However, it has been noted that the coat of arms from those of the Camberwell branch varies wildly from their northern relatives. We will begin at the St Giles's Church in Peckham, which still stands on its original site and is estimated to have been originally constructed as early as the 7th century. And later rebuilt in stone in 1154, quite possibly through the patronage of the Muschamp family. In the Transactions of the London Archaeological Society, a great trove of historical documentation concerning this branch of the family is chronicled vividly in several medieval stained glass windows and architectural features at St Giles Chapel, which commemorated their ancestral names, dates, crest symbols and coats of arms. These artifacts have since perished, but had been preserved well into the 19th century. Our first patriarch recorded in this area dates all the way back to 1464, to that of a Thomas Muschamp, the Sheriff of London, who descended from the medieval Camberwell branch that were ranked among the barons called to Parliament from the reign of King Henry I to that of King Henry IV from 1100 to 1413. A descendant using the same coat of arms, named William Muschamp, whose ancient pedigree resides in the British Museum, appears to be the founding father of a Renaissance-era Camberwell family who successfully transitioned from a feudal barony into active government service, military careers, church ministry, merchants, sole proprietors and shipmasters. The names of the children of this family are important because they are most likely the progenitors of the Mustian family that will eventually immigrate to America. They are listed as follows: Richard, who remained at Peckham, and his son, who is the famous Master Francis Mustian, of whom Thomas Dekker dedicated his book. Edward, of whom nothing is known. Thomas, who was well known as a citizen and goldsmith of London. Christopher, who was made Baron of the Exchequer, which is similar to a Supreme Court judge.
Here's an interesting one. There was some kind of legal battle between a Sir Thomas Muschamp in London who had obstructed a lane, and there was a suit from the Merchant Tailors Company against Sir Thomas Muschamp. Here's another account of the same exact thing, but again, they flipped the name. And so here it says the merchant tailors versus Mustian, also or alias Muschamp. Again, a spelling error there with the Muschamp family, who was a knight for stopping a footpath. Same incident, same story, but in a different archive. And we find that Mustian is on top, Muschamp is on the bottom. And so that's why you find these connections between the two names and the two families.
It is critical to note that this family seems to fully adopt the Anglicanized surname of Mustian more than any other branch of the Muschamp family beginning in the 14th century. For these and many more reasons, this branch is considered the best candidate for the ancestral immigrant of the Mustian family in the United States. For instance, by the beginning of the 16th century, the legal preference listed in the surname column for the will of Master Francis is clearly Mustian, with the family name of Muschamp listed below it. This is a departure from a generation previous, when the Mustian name wasn't listed in the wills of the Muschamp family. Anything more than circumstantial evidence of ancestral immigration this far back in time is rare and is usually the exception rather than the rule. However, a truly fascinating document was recently uncovered which has answered a centuries-old mystery about who the Mustian family immigrant may have been and how they arrived in America. In a book entitled English Duplicates of Lost Virginia Records, in a list of ships and their masters arriving in the District of Potomac from 1691 to 1692, and at the bottom corner of the page we find the long-rumoured merchant ship the Phoenix listed, which was mastered by none other than Thomas Mustian, another common misspelling of the name Mustian. We can corroborate the existence of a shipmaster or captain named Mustian with many documents, but most notably in a book called The Four Masters, which mentions our Master Mustian sailing to Macassar, but accidentally missing the island because of the unskillfulness of his pilot. Furthermore, we can either trace the genealogical tree back to the historic group of coastal towns in southeast England, known as the Cinque Ports, an old French word meaning 5 harbours, which saw its peak in the late Middle Ages, or going in the other direction to the west, we find the very large seaport of Portsmouth. Here in the Goring-by-the-Sea area of Sussex, we discover a large number of families who are known exclusively as Mustians, and who, by the year 1655, had sired a future shipmaster by the name of Thomas Solomon Mustian, the daring mariner believed to have eventually sailed his family to the shores of Virginia in the belly of the merchant ship the Phoenix. While a direct connection with the London and Camberwell families has yet to be established. With this coastal family, it is highly plausible that a branch of that family tree migrated south to these seaport areas, which are only an hour or two away. In Part 3, we will explore this seaborne immigrant link to America more closely. But for now, let's look at the final location in the Muschamp and Mustian family connection as we sail across the Irish Sea to Dublin, Ireland.
The year 1169 marks a pivotal moment in Irish history, as the arrival of the Normans sets in motion centuries of English involvement in Ireland. In 1169, a small force of Norman knights from Wales, led by Richard de Clare, known as Strongbow, landed in Ireland. They came at the invitation of Diarmait mac Murchada, the deposed king of Leinster, who sought help to regain his throne. The Normans, with their superior military technology, quickly established control over parts of Ireland. In 1171, King Henry II of England arrived with a larger force, concerned about the growing power of his Norman lords in Ireland. This marks the beginning of direct English involvement in Irish affairs. Initially, Norman control was limited to an area around Dublin known as the Pale. Over time, English influence spread, though it remained incomplete for centuries. The English introduced their system of common law and established a parliament in Dublin. However, many Norman lords adopted Irish customs and language, a process known as Gaelicization. By the 14th century, English control had weakened significantly, leading King Richard II to lead 2 expeditions to Ireland to reassert royal authority. A significant shift occurred under Henry VIII in the 16th century. In 1541, he declared himself King of Ireland, aiming to exert more direct control and impose English law and customs throughout the island. As English rule tightened, resistance grew. The Irish forces were ultimately defeated at the Battle of Kinsale in 1601. These conflicts set the stage for increased English intervention in the 17th century.
Into this violent and tumultuous time and place from a branch of the London Camberwell family line was thrown Denny Muschamp, aka Mustian, the Muster General of Ireland. Essentially an administrative position. The Muster General was a military position responsible for overseeing the muster rolls, or what we would call manpower management today. This flag rank position accounted for the soldiers in the army and managed military logistics for all of the English forces in the Ireland theatre of operations. As the British government became more and more bogged down in the occupation of Ireland, the significance of this role in organising and maintaining the military structure and readiness of the forces became increasingly vital. Denny Muschamp was the son of Colonel Agmondisham Muschamp from Ballybricken in Cork, Ireland, who had immigrated from the Surrey estate of his father, William Muschamp. This branch of the family would go on to produce many Oxford and Cambridge graduates, as well as high-ranking military officers and successful merchants, and allegedly produced another immigrant to America named John Mustian, although this link has yet to be validated with the proper documentation. Granted, this Agmondisham and Denny Muschamp branch does offer some interesting insights into the family history, and it very well may have produced an immigrant to America. Nevertheless, it does not support the bulk of genealogical research concerning what might be considered the core family of Mustians, who settled in the southern Virginia and North Carolina areas in the late 16th century. However, because of the many possibilities that family trees tend to offer, we can't be too dogmatic either way. Regardless, it would appear from the available evidence that a line from the London branch of the Muschamp and Mustian family chose to fully embrace the Mustian surname, migrate to the seaport areas of southern England, and at least some of them pursued employment in the merchant shipping industry of the East India Trading Company from 1600 to 1874. This intrepid family then chose to brave the high seas of the Atlantic Ocean and sail to the New World at the height of the British colonization of America from 1607 and 1763. Thomas Solomon Mustian seems to have been the first to make this journey and plant his flag on the eastern shores of Virginia in 1691, but there certainly could have been others that we know nothing about. Why did they come, you ask? Well, like the others that came, they may have been fleeing political or religious persecution and searching for freedom from oppression. Many Puritans sought to escape religious persecution under King Charles and the Church of England's practices, which conflicted with pure Christian beliefs. The political climate in England worsened after King Charles I dissolved Parliament in 1629, and this action left many vulnerable to persecution, which only intensified their desire to leave England. The promise of land and economic opportunity in the New World attracted many families as well, and immigrants were often motivated by the hope of better living conditions and the chance to own land. Many of the migrants were working-class families, skilled artisans and tradesmen who sought a new life that allowed for a more stable and prosperous existence compared to the hardships faced in England. We may never know why the first Muschamps came for shore, or even who those first brave souls were, but we are forever indebted to them for giving us the great gift of our American citizenship and a family heritage that is to be envied by the world. There are many who have been richer and more powerful. There are many who have been more famous and even more popular. Ours is not a family that stands out too far in a crowd or draws too much attention to itself. The Mustian family can be seen, however, as a victoriously brave, hard-working, nation-defending, family-loving, God-fearing and truth-telling clan that usually sought to do the right thing, even though they may have been on the wrong side of history at the time. In Part 3, we will attempt to discover more about our immigrant fathers and what paths they chose once they reached the shores of America.